Hello, welcome to Rough Cut Film Review. This is a review of Man of Steel. So this is Zach Snyder being given a big franchise to turn his nerdy enthusiasm into pots of money for the studio. And one thing about Zach Snyder is that he loves the source material. He's a big nerd, he loves this stuff, and while he'll never be the greatest director on the planet, or Krypton actually, that was going to be the joke, or Earth or Krypton. Anyway, his enthusiasm really rubs off on the screen. Now, cards on the table, I don't really find Superman an inherently very interesting character at all. Much like Spider-Man, it's people talking very earnestly about things like responsibility, and I find it all very old-fashioned, granted. It is very old-fashioned, but it's also dull. How many times do we have to keep watching the same old origin stories? But in fairness, the origin story here is actually handled pretty well. We get a sense of the tragic demise of a once great civilization, destroyed basically by its own greed/hubris. It's the message of Fern Gully, really. It's supposed to represent a mirror to our world, the Krypton I'm talking about here, and the parallels between Earth and us on the planet Earth and what happened in Krypton. So they send an innocent baby to us, which represents hope and the chance to do things differently. So he's called Captain Hindsight. Captain Planet. Superman. But they don't really call him Superman in the film. Much like Catwoman wasn't really called Catwoman in Christopher Nolan's Batman. So my first complaint about this really is once you have a hero who is pretty much invulnerable, you really leave yourself nowhere to go. So with the Superman films of old, they've got to go, alright, there's something called kryptonite. He doesn't like that. It's bad for him. Yeah, that'll do. Or the baddie might be a computer programmer, maybe? That's a thing, sure. There's mild peril there. The other thing I find a bit strange is I think there's probably something wrong with Superman because he's essentially got godlike powers, and you'd imagine someone would get tremendously bored with the trivial issues of such a simple and basic and selfish creature as us humans are. Eventually you'd end up becoming really detached and alienated and deeply unhappy, as Dr. Manhattan does in The Watchmen. Although to be fair, actually, these are all sorts of criticisms of old Superman and can't be applied to the Snyder movie as much as you could the old. So Henry Cavill is okay as Superman. He certainly looks the part. He's got the physique for it and he looks good on a poster, but I've never seen him in a film where he's anything more than poor to middling, and that doesn't really change here. He's okay. Luckily we have Amy Adams, who is excellent as Lois Lane, the investigating journalist, who is far more feasible as a journalist and as a human being than Terry Hatcher ever was. And this starts to hint and paint a picture as to why this is better than I was expecting it to be. And fundamentally, Zack Snyder does an okay job behind the camera, and Christopher Nolan and his colleague David Goyer and a few other people have written this, and as such they managed to bring some real colour to what has traditionally been for me a rather old-fashioned and preachy tale without losing any of the apple pie misty-eyed sentimentality that presumably the real Superman fans go nuts for. What I do like here is they lay off the Superman shtick, and the film is quite effective at presenting Superman as hope, both physical and metaphorical. And at one point they even say, the S, Lois Lane says, hey, what's the S for on your chest? And he says, that's not an S, that represents hope. That was a nice little touch. I really appreciated that, and it just shows the difference between this and previous Superman films. So what does it all add up to? Well, we've got Snyder and Cavill doing an okay job. The writing's good, as I've said. It's a sentimental soundtrack. We've got big effects and a very decent cast. The film's a bit too long. The effects are a bit too much. They just go on that a little bit too much and they lose a little bit of their impact. Amy Adams is there, Larry Fishburne, Diane Lane, Russell Crowe, and Kevin Costner puts in an appearance. Of all people, there's Kevin Costner. Michael Shannon is really good as the malevolent General Zod, and like all good baddies, he's really sympathetic, and very, very well played. You can understand the rage and the hate in him. That's all really, really good. I like that a lot. Put it all together and this is a more mainstream blockbuster than the Christopher Nolan Batman films were. It's nowhere near as good as that, and it suffers from being too long, but it's a thoroughly decent summer blockbuster that is well worth catching on Blu-ray if you haven't seen it already. Kind regards, Christopher Thomas.